I'm Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today's show is a special joint production of the University of the District of Columbia and the University of Cape Town. I'm here in Cape Town, South Africa, where we'll be talking about education and education policy. Dr. Mamphela Ramphele is a former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cape Town and leader of the new political party, Agang South Africa. Dr. Ramphele is a medical doctor, an anthropologist, and author of Across Boundaries, The Journey of a South African Woman Leader. We taped the interview earlier this month on location in Cape Town, South Africa. Welcome.
Thank you, Stephen.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, it's always wonderful to welcome people to my beautiful country.
And it really is a beautiful country.
Indeed, that's what gets us out of bed every day.
Well, speaking of getting out of bed, one of the things that intrigues me about your history, which is very storied, as many people know, the thing that intrigues me is why you would start a new political party 20 years after Nelson Mandela walked out of prison.
It is odd. It's not only 20 years after Mr. Mandela walked out of prison that we are starting Agang, the new political party. But I'm 65. I've never been a member of a political party. I've never aspired to political office. But you know, when your country is at the crossroads, as my country is, and you have invested so much of your own youth, and you want to honor the sacrifices of so many of your friends, colleagues who fought for this freedom that we are enjoying today, you then do extraordinary things. I am in this business of building the country of our dreams, which is what Agang means, let's build. I'm inviting my fellow citizens to go back to the principles that Mr. Mandela and his government and many South Africans contributed to formulating, which is what is encapsulated in our constitution. We in Agang believe that the country has been led away from those basic principles of human rights, equality, and freedom.
And assuming that that is so, and I'm assuming that people in South Africa have different opinions about that, how is your platform, particularly on the education front, going to move South Africa in a different direction than the current government is doing?
One of the tragedies of post-apartheid South Africa is that the freedom we are enjoying today was fought for primarily by young people who revolted against Bantu education in 1976 and thereby sparked a new wave of struggle against apartheid. They were against the poor quality of education under Bantu education. If they were alive today, they'd be shocked that the education post-apartheid, 20 years into our freedom, is worse for poor children. 80% of our schools, by government's own statistics, are dysfunctional. That's what's really got me out of bed. Because no country in the world, let alone in the 21st century, can succeed without quality education to develop the skills and talents of its people. Now, we are the country with the youngest population profile of all the countries in the world. It's a scandal that we are not giving young people in this country the opportunity to become the best that they can be. So that's what Agang is about. It is about returning to the fundamental commitment to make every young person feel that they matter, and every citizen feel that their country is doing good by our children, because that's the only way we can move people out of poverty.
And I understand that. And my understanding is that your party means to build in Sotho. How would you exactly build the education infrastructure in a way that hasn't been built so far? I understand that the education matrix in South Africa are nowhere near what you'd like them to be, and I think most people would acknowledge that. But how specifically are you planning to do that if you become president?
It is about going back to basics with education. We have to have schools that are called schools because they've got adequate classrooms for every child. We still have mud schools in parts of South Africa today. We have schools that have no laboratories, no libraries, and not even basic toilets, let alone sporting facilities. And this is what the Minister of Education has been taken to court by Equal Education for. The failure to simply enunciate and live by the norms and standards of every decent society. So that's where we're going to start. We also are going to make sure that every teacher has the skills, the knowledge to teach what they are teaching. You cannot have pilots in the cockpit who are not competent to fly an airplane. Our children are special cargo, real precious cargo. And they are being flown around in their youth by teachers who are not competent to teach. There are very many teachers who are committed, very many of them who are doing excellent work. But there is a significant proportion of teachers in the 80% of the schools that are dysfunctional who really shouldn't be standing in front of a classroom. So we will make sure every teacher is assessed, and those who want to improve their qualifications, we'll send them back to teacher training to be able to get the knowledge that they need. For the rest, we'll help them to find other jobs more suitable to their skills. And we will make sure that every child is introduced to information technology early on. I don't understand why we are still using textbooks that never seem to arrive at schools, when we could use tablets, load them with material, and have libraries where kids can go and look at reference works. That's what we will do as Agang. We'll also make sure that we train teachers properly. What we did by closing down teacher training colleges was a mistake. And every normal country recognizes mistakes and corrects them. And that's what we need to do.
Well, that's an interesting point. Yesterday I met some teachers who were in Cape Town to protest the closure of a number of rural schools. They were with COSATU, the union, and their complaint was that there weren't enough there weren't enough schools in the rural areas of the Cape Province, and that their complaint was that they were closing down schools.
Well, that is a politicized education issue. The reality is, like every part of the world, people migrate from rural to urban areas, particularly in this country where we don't have a rural development strategy. You can't keep schools open in places where there are no people living. And these closures are happening right across the country, but because there's a union that is affiliated to the governing African National Congress, they are being selective. They should be protesting the fact that there are schools in the Eastern Cape that have no teachers, and there are other schools that have got more teachers than they are entitled to, because of the same union, SADU, the South African Democratic Teachers Union, which has chosen to discourage its members from being reallocated to schools where they are needed, and thereby give young South Africans an opportunity. I don't know the details of the Western Cape issue, but the fact of the matter is, if there is a case that settlements have moved, we have to move resources to where people are and not simply keep them for historic reasons.
And that's a fair point. In terms of the resources at universities, I've also talked to a number of people on this trip to South Africa who've complained that the resources at the different universities in South Africa have been misallocated. And you're a former chancellor, vice-chancellor of the University of Cape Town, so as you all know, you had to struggle with this when you were in office. But how do you see the university struggling with the issue of changing resources?
The first important point to make around resource allocation to higher education is that the higher education system has to take leadership for the entire education system, because That's where the intellectual resources are. And they should be able to present and argue for, and if necessary, mobilize South Africans to come up behind them to insist on adequate allocation of resources to education, starting from preschool. We still have more children out of preschool than those in preschool. Yes. And that means that the foundations of our education system are missing. Second, those children who come from the poorest regions, poorest families, are the ones who don't have preschool facilities, which is actually quite ironical because that's where you most need preschool education. So the higher education system would have greater credibility for asking for more resources and getting the support of citizens if they were seen to be taking leadership in terms of having their voices heard about the importance of preschool education, quality primary school education, quality high school education. Because at the end of the day, our higher education system today is acting as an ambulance for children broken by a broken primary and secondary school education. So it's in the interest of higher education to stop doing academic development and remedial teaching and start focusing on how they can get South Africa's people to put pressure on the government to make sure that our school system delivers to higher education the requisite quality of people. Now, 20 years after the change to democracy, there is no excuse for continuing to treat this as an emergency. It can't be. We've got to go back to the root cause. And having said that, as a Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, I just know how hard I had to work to mobilize extra resources because we never did get enough resources. This country is not investing enough in research and development. And if we were to enlarge that pool of funding, we would have enough money to be able to fund teaching, learning, and research at higher education, because that's the only way you get ahead. You look at Israel, a startup country in 1948. Look at where they are today. They are a leader in research and development and innovation in everything. And you look at how much are they investing in research and development, higher than any country in the world. Why? Because they understand that knowledge is the most important resource in today's globally competitive economy.
Well, and that's a fair point. But I wonder if a young child who was born where you were born, in a rural area in South Africa, has a realistic chance of ending up at Limpopo, at the University of Limpopo, or the University of Cape Town, do they have a realistic chance of actually benefiting from the research and development that you're talking about? And I think you're right in that society should encourage that, whether it's this country or any other country. But is it realistic that a student born today is really going to be able to take advantage of that?
Unfortunately, not. Until and unless we change the leadership of this country, we are really going in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, when you look at most African countries, the weakest ministries are the ministries of education. In our case, we've got basic education, a basic education ministry, led by a woman who has clearly failed to do the basic work, including norms and standards and being able to implement them. Second, we've got a higher education ministry led by someone who is much busier running his party, the South African Communist Party, than actually focusing on the real issues of higher education. And that is the price we are paying for political appointments that are completely at variance with the kind of professional, meritocratic public service that our Constitution demands of us, so that we can provide for this country a leadership that will give every child, whether they are born in Limpopo like I was, or in the Eastern Cape, a fair chance of being able to develop their talents and being able to have a shot at a career that will really be fulfilling for them.
But as you know, this is a common thread in politics around the world, where a lot of people running for office say, well, the existing government isn't doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to do it a little bit better, and that's why you should vote for me or my party. What I'm interested in, I guess, is the issue of the corruption, which you keep raising in, if I understand your speeches correctly, you raise the issue of corruption a lot. And a lot of governments are corrupt in some way, right? You can find some corrupt person or somebody who's not taking advantage or is taking advantage of his or her position. Do you inherently think that South Africa is more corrupt than other countries?
It's not a question of inherent corruption. It is a question of the impunity of corruption in this country. And that is tied to the sense of entitlement of many in the African National Congress. They have hijacked the collective effort that led to the freedom of this country and made it look like they were the only major player in terms of the liberation of this country. That is not correct. Even Mr. Mandela has been heard time and again saying, never be fooled by anybody to say that freedom can be ascribed to an individual, whether it's me, Mr. Mandela, or to an organization. South Africa's freedom was fought for by the collective effort of those inside the country, outside the country, and the international community that supported us. So on the basis of that claim, many in the ANC feel that it is now their time to eat, basically. And you just show me one country which calls itself a democracy where the president can hijack 270 million and counting, because we don't know the end of this, to build himself a palace when people are living, like you have seen on the Cape Flats, in horrible shacks, that schools don't have enough money to be able to build classrooms and other facilities. And he feels entitled to do that. Not only that, his Minister of Public Works decides that a report that is commissioned to look at what actually happened is top secret. Now, that level of impunity you don't have. If it was in the US, he would have been hauled in front of senators, he would have been impeached. Anywhere else, in any half-decent democracy, he would have been impeached. That's the difference between South Africa and anywhere else where there is corruption. And that is what got me at 65 out of my retirement to say, this has to be stopped. I have 2 grandchildren. I don't want them to grow up in a country where right and wrong are confused. We have to go back to the values of our constitution, which are very clear. If you believe in human dignity, in equality of all people, in the freedom of all South Africans, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't take 27 million, let alone 270 million. But in this country, we've just had this week an example of Potchefstroom or Tlokwe municipality where a mayor, for the second time, was voted out of office for corruption. And instead of the councillors who were part of this being lauded for this, no, they've been fired without any due process by the same government, the same governing party that claims that it is against corruption. So we have a problem of a governing party that has no clue anymore about what's right and what's wrong. All that matters is how they stay in power. That's what's got me out of bed.
Well, that's a very powerful statement. Are you saying that President Jacob Zuma doesn't care about the people in the Eastern Cape?
I don't believe he does, because if he did, he wouldn't take 20 million rand, let alone 270 million rand, and build himself a palace when people in the Eastern Cape don't have jobs, don't have clinics. The clinics don't have medicines in them. They don't have, the teachers are not there in classes. He is not preoccupied with the business of how to make sure every normal, ordinary citizen gets their entitlement. His friends, the Guptas, extraordinary. Where in the world can you have foreigners flying into your Air Force base? I mean, they'll be shot out of nothing if if they had tried to do that in your country, in the United States. But here, not only were they welcomed, but we spent money, we escorted them, like they were royalty in my country, at my taxpayers' expense. I take a very dim view of that. And that there is no remorse. There is cover up. A few officials are said to have dropped a name here. Why would anybody drop a name if there were proper systems in place? So we have an extraordinary culture of impunity with respect to corruption in this country.
Well, do you think the corruption extends to universities as well? Do you think that university admissions is fair?
I can't speak with authority on that, but what I do know is beginning to show up as corrupt practices is that students who come from those poorly performing schools are buying themselves certificates, higher education diplomas, high school diplomas that they take into higher education. And some of them have been found out and they're being dealt with. But you see, the fish rots from the top. When you, as a president or as a government, are seen to be corrupt, you remove the link between hard work and reward. And young people, like anybody else, they learn that, well, you can get away here with doing stuff like that. So there is no doubt in my mind that higher education will be impacted by this culture of corruption and impunity.
Well, let's say I'm a university student today in South Africa, and I'm interested in politics. And the African National Congress is the party in power, and I'm interested in politics. Why would I not try to join the ANC? Because wouldn't I have a better chance of getting into the government?
Well, you could try your luck. But if you look at what's happening even within that party today, there are so many factions and so many concentric rings of who is close to whom that I would advise you as a young, energetic person to rather find an honest route to a more rewarding career rather than go into the dark night of knives in your back. So we have a system which has really corrupted public service. Public service, in terms of our constitution, is meant to be professional, meritocratic, and impartial. So if you're looking for that public service, you won't find it through the ANC. We have to work together as citizens across the spectrum. Agang is a party of all South Africans. It's not a black party, it's not a white party, it's a South African party. And we believe that we can and we must and we will build the country of our dreams. And that country is one which we articulate in the preamble of our constitution, a prosperous democracy united in its diversity. What a beautiful country. We've got natural resources for Africa. We've got mineral resources for Africa. We've got beautiful people, young population. Why wouldn't we succeed? The only missing link in our story in South Africa is leadership. We had wonderful leadership under Mr. Mandela. Unfortunately, he was too old when he was released from jail. But what we need now is to enable the next generation, the generation of my sons and daughters, to come forward and lead their country into the country that so many people fought and died for. And I believe it is possible. And we are building it day by day.
And that's a fair point. We're going to be out of time in just a minute, but maybe if we can ask another question or so about the issue of generations. In one of your books, I don't remember which one, but you made a really interesting point about that today's activists don't trust yesterday's activists. And I thought that was kind of an interesting point. And you're a former activist, and most of the world knows that you're, about your history and being a very well-known former activist. But now you're not 25, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I'm not 25 either. But do the current students trust you, even though you are not a current leader today on a campus or a school, but that you were?
They absolutely do. And I mean, I've just come back from a 100-person volunteer training program. Why are those young people coming out in such large numbers? Because they know I'm not in this game because I need a job, or I need to get rich, or I need to be known. I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. What they know is that I am committed to the future of this country. And I am very aware that former activists, if they don't change their mindset away from being liberation activists to being builders of a liberated country, they can fall into traps such as we have seen with the last 20 years here. We are a party that's learned from the mistakes of the last 20 years and the mistakes of post-colonial Africa. We believe we can build that model, modern African democracy, and a model, not just for this country or this continent, but also for the world, because we believe we can, through Ubuntu, show how human dignity can be affirmed every day in a democratic system.
Well, good luck to you, Dr. Ramphele.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
If you would like additional information about Dr. Ramphele, please visit agangsa.org.za. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.